This weekend in racing, NASCAR had a finish that felt like it was plucked straight out of the year 2001. But first, before we talk about that, there's some major sponsorship announcements we need to cover, as well as the Mexican Grand Prix. So it was announced today that Fuzzy's Vodka, longtime sponsor of Ed Carpenter Racing, in fact, they've been with the team since it was formed in 2012, will no longer be sponsoring the 20 or 21 Fuzzy's Vodka Chevrolets. Well, I guess they're not Fuzzy's Vodka Chevrolets anymore in the IndyCar series. This also means the end of their partnership with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And obviously, anytime you have a longtime sponsor leaving the sport and leaving a team which they have had such a long relationship with, that's not a good situation. However, Ed Carpenter has made it pretty clear that the team is just fine financially. In fact, one of the co-founders of Fuzzy's Vodka, one of the guys who is probably instrumental in having that logo on the cars in the first place, is remaining with the team. And of course, there's also the new partnership they formed with Scuderia Corsa, the IMSA Ferrari team, going into the future. So Ed Carpenter Racing is going to be okay. Everything is going to stay the same from the perspective of drivers and team allotments. We're still going to have the one single championship car of Spencer Pigot, along with the split car for Ed Jones and Ed Carpenter, along with Jones taking the third car at the Indianapolis 500. As for Fuzzy's Vodka, now certainly for a branding exercise, it was a major sponsor. Certainly the local Indiana racing fans were very much behind that sponsor and that car, and they knew what to look for. I think a lot of people are going to make the mistake next year of calling Ed Carpenter's car the Fuzzy's Vodka Chevrolet, even though it's not anymore. But I think you have to look at Fuzzy's Vodka for what it is. And ultimately, I'm not entirely sure they sold enough bottles of vodka to justify their two-car sponsorship in the first place. So it makes me question exactly how much financial input they actually had into the solvency of the team itself. You only have to look no further than the Fuzzy's branding on the Turn 2 suites at Indianapolis, and in fact becoming the official vodka supplier of the Speedway, as well as branding all over the track. And then look at the ownership group of Ed Carpenter Racing. Obviously, we know Ed Carpenter's connection to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but you have to also realize that Tony George, yes, that Tony George, is one of the co-owners of Ed Carpenter Racing. So it stands to reason, or at least if you're observational, when you're at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, you'll notice some prime placement of Ed Carpenter Racing sponsors there. A lot of that has to do with how they sell the sponsors to the team, and having familial connections at the greatest race in the world certainly helps that cause. So do I think it's going to be the Clabber Girl special going next year? Obviously, the Holman's own Clabber Girl. No, I don't think that's going to be that way. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a current or maybe future IMS IndyCar partner heading onto that team for next year. They're going to be just fine, but at the same time, certainly from a branding perspective, you hate to see a sponsor like this leave. But it does... This whole conversation does kind of lead us into the next piece of news, which is a major sponsorship announcement. And we discovered yesterday that Jimmie Johnson will be trading the black from Lowe's for the purple of Ally Financial. Yes, Ally Financial will sign a 2-year deal to be the exclusive sponsor of Jimmie Johnson moving forward. They are an online bank financial service kind of deal, and it kind of adds to a trend that we've been seeing in racing in recent years of this kind of a sponsor coming in. Now, it's not anything new or unique. In fact, this sponsor under the name GMAC sponsored Hendrick Motorsports back in the glory days, the heyday of NASCAR, on car number 25, and I think in the Busch Series they were on car number 5. So they've obviously been here before. They have a relationship with Hendrick Motorsports through Hendrick's dealers. They are, I believe, if it wasn't this way before this deal, it is this way now. They are the official financee or financer to Hendrick Motorsports or Hendrick Cars customers. When they come in, they need a loan for a car, it's Ally Financial who handles that. So why do we see all these banks and credit unions and data companies and tech companies like we see in IndyCar with Arrow Electronics? Why do we see these companies that really fans can't support in particular ways? I mean, sure, maybe if you're a Scott Dixon fan, you can move your bank to PNC, but what's the real sell here? Why do these companies, and why are these companies in particular, seem to be the place where a team will go when they lose a consumer sponsor such as a Lowe's or a Target, something along that lines? Why do they end up with a bank on the side of their car? So it's not because the bank's loaning the money. They are giving them sponsorship. But we are seeing a major shift in sponsorship, racing sponsorships, and it's been happening for a while, there's no doubt about it, from your kind of consumer to business relations to business relations. Now, what are business to business relations? Well, there's a variety of things. A lot of times when you see an oil company on the side of a race car, especially these days, it's not necessarily because Hendrick Motorsports or Valvoline is looking at Hendrick Motorsports and saying, you know what, we're going to sell, 100,000, 100 million more bottles of oil because of our connection to Hendrick Motorsports. That's not necessarily it. What they are able to get out of the deal is the kind of great partnerships you can have with a wealthy businessman like Rick Hendrick. I would make a big wager that the cars in Rick Hendrick's dealerships are all filled to the brim with Valvoline oil. And not only that, and especially when we start talking about data companies, tech companies, financial companies, a lot of these companies have to do a lot of schmoozing. And what schmoozing is, of course, is bringing your high-dollar investors, your high-dollar customers out for a good time to build customer relations. And I think that's what we're seeing here. There's already a relationship between Ally Financial and Hendrick Motorsports, but Rick Hendrick, along with Ally, I'm sure, looked at this as an opportunity to help their partners going forward. So really what I'm trying to say here is most racing sponsorships these days are not sold based on the logo on the side of the car. In fact, that's such a small part of racing sponsorship these days that it's almost insignificant. You almost are barking up the wrong tree if you're saying, well, golly gee, you're going to get a logo on the side of the car. No legitimate company really is looking at that anymore. They're looking at all of the periphery things. If they want to sell, I'll put it this way, if they want to sell you something, a NASCAR fan, if they want to target NASCAR fans in a particular product, if they want to sell you, let's say Lowe's, they want to sell you some lumber, putting a logo on the side of Jimmie Johnson's car is not the most cost-effective way of doing it. In fact, the most cost-effective way of reaching you NASCAR fans, and I'm going to be honest, it's to go to YouTube, buy advertising space there, and say, I want my ad to appear on NASCAR-related videos. And that's where it'll appear. So that's just the growing or the changing environment of sponsorship. What the teams are selling now, or at least what sponsors are asking for, is not how many units am I going to sell based on my logo being on that car. It's more coming to teams and saying, if I put my logo on this car, how big is our corporate suite? How good's the catering? And how many garage passes do we get? That's really what it's all about these days. So that's kind of what we're seeing, or at least why we're seeing a lot of this. In fact, you actually look at the statements from Ally Financial, they don't really talk a whole lot about the fans. They don't talk a whole lot about customer relations. They talk about the ability to use Jimmie Johnson in their corporate functions. They talk about brand awareness, and it's not necessarily brand awareness with you, the fans. In fact, it's interesting because Hendrick Motorsports is kind of one of the pioneers of this. DuPont, the sponsor, you couldn't really buy DuPont paint. It was more about their real customers, the auto body shops that were buying paint and then being able to put that paint on the fans' cars. And so it was kind of like a 2 degrees of separation to an extent. To put that photo of the Jeff Gordon car in the shop window, they had to sell or DuPont paint, and then that Jeff Gordon car would get the other customers in buying paint with the name recognition of DuPont. You see how that works? It's kind of a little bit like this, but it's even more to the cynical nature of things. It's just, again, the changing nature of the beast in racing, and we're going to see more of this. We're going to see less of the Betty Crockers and more of the First Datas going forward. And even this goes to big teams as well. I think I mentioned like the Valvoline example. Again, you look at a big sponsor like Shell Pennzoil. I would bet you dollars to donuts it's not because Shell really thinks they're going to make a whole lot of impact by sponsoring Joey Logano's 22, Castroneves 3, and the V8 Supercar program. It's probably more because they want to be the exclusive oil supplier to Penske's truck rental line. That's just the way it goes. And so, again, we're going to be seeing much more of this in the future. This is the direction sponsorship is headed in terms of racing. And I guess prepare yourselves for it because you're going to be seeing it a whole lot more. I guess it is good, though, I will say, for Jimmie Johnson to have a solid sponsor, regardless of how it comes about, for 2 more years. And that means, I guess, Jimmie's in the sport for 2 more years, which is a good thing because really right now NASCAR needs all the star power it can get. So Lewis Hamilton made history this weekend. He became a 5-time world driving champion, equaling Juan-Manuel Fangio and tying for second all-time behind the great Michael Schumacher with 7 world driving championships. So Lewis does it. It was kind of a foregone conclusion. We all thought really it was probably going to happen at the United States Grand Prix. It didn't. But the race itself really didn't have a whole lot to do with Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, the focus was on him because of his world championship aspirations, but it was really a story of Red Bull Racing, and it was really Max Verstappen. Now, Verstappen was looking like he was going to become the youngest pole winner ever in F1. He had been fast all weekend, had led, I think, every session up until Q3. He goes out there, sets an incredibly fast time, beats Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel to the pole, and then Daniel Ricciardo comes around and beats him by 0.002 or hundredths or thousandths of a second. It was very close, let's put it that way. It was a significantly smaller portion of increment of time than a blink of an eye. How about that? So it was Red Bull across the front row, and this was something that a lot of people were very anticipatory about because it's like, wow, okay, so we've got a Mercedes and a Ferrari in the second row and the 2 Red Bulls leading. The Red Bulls, of course, powered by Renault Power. That power unit is not nearly as good. So everybody thought they'd be 4 wide into turn 1. They were 3 wide. Lewis Hamilton was in the middle and was able to get the jump on Ricciardo, but it was Verstappen taking the lead and really running away. The unfortunate reality of this race, though, for Red Bull was the fact that despite Daniel Ricciardo being able to fight his way back up into second place and looked like he would be able to hold off Sebastian Vettel for the second position on the podium, it was not to be. The car failed. Now, apparently it was a clutch issue, not part of the Renault power unit like it was in Austin, Texas. But regardless, reliability problems still nagging at Daniel Ricciardo. That was very unfortunate. And Sebastian Vettel, he got second. He had to win to keep himself in the title hunt, and in fact needed Hamilton to finish 7th, which once Ricciardo was out of the picture, unless Hamilton had some massive failure, that wasn't going to happen. And Verstappen pretty much marched to an easy win. One of the other stories of this whole weekend was the tire wear, and certainly it seemed like the Red Bull was easily the best car on its tires. Most of the pit stops, in fact, that Red Bull was making were mainly just in response to Ferrari and Mercedes and the potential that would a safety car come out, that they would be on less than great rubber when compared to the other 2 brands. But it was a dominant weekend for Verstappen. Again, second race at Mexico in a row that he's been able to do that. And a lot of people have been speculating, they were speculating on the broadcast, that Verstappen will be one of the guys to beat next year with a much more potent Honda power unit, kind of a revitalization of that particular engine in Formula One going into next year. So it should be an interesting year going forward, and it will be interesting to see how everything plays out now that Hamilton has wrapped up the Drivers' Championship. That means Valtteri Bottas is going to be off the chain as well. Kimi Räikkönen, he got third place. He couldn't believe that because I think at one point he was some 30 seconds, almost a full lap behind the race. He got third, got a podium. So good for Kimi. And yeah, next year will be interesting. The rest of the year will be interesting. But we have to real quick pause and say, good Lord, Lewis Hamilton. Again, I really do believe, I said this in the United States Grand Prix review, he's been driving better than he ever has. I think it's pretty clear at this point that the Ferrari, and people were contesting this, but I will stand by the Ferrari is the better car. They've just not had the execution that Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton have. Just look at the fact that Valtteri Bottas lost an entire lap in this race. Certainly Hamilton did not do that. But we're witnessing greatness. Hamilton is clearly one of the greatest of all time. It'll be interesting see if he can get the Schumacher, especially with a major regulation change coming in 2020. So that may be the true test. If suddenly, and it already looks like the tide is turning away from away from Mercedes, maybe into the hands of Red Bull and Ferrari moving forward. So where will that put Hamilton if he doesn't have the best car? We may see the best yet to come from Lewis Hamilton. All right, the main course, the main event, the finish to Martinsville. You guys probably have all let your voices be heard about this one. It was a huge discussion on social media as Joey Logano laid the bumper to Martin Truex after a duel which lasted nearly 20 laps. Truex gets loose into Logano, and Denny Hamlin manages to kind of take advantage, take second. Logano gets the win after putting the bumper to him. So there's a lot of things to unpack here. First off, one of the best, probably last 40 laps to a NASCAR race I've seen in a very long time. I thought the quality was absolutely excellent. The racing was fantastic. It was up until the last corner. It was rough. It was clean. It was fair, but it was very exciting. And so I really felt confident because I'd gone on the final inspection show in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And thanks for the shout. You're welcome for the shout out, Steve. But I made the prediction that Brad Keselowski was going to win the race, and I thought he would, especially coming into that last stint with Logano in the lead, and it looked like Keselowski had a way, way better car. But the chase came into play. Logano is in the championship hunt. Keselowski isn't. Keselowski was incredibly nice to Joey Logano, and that allowed the Toyotas of Truex, Hamlin, and Busch to all get back up there and have a 5-car fight for the win. But it was pretty clear once Truex got past Keselowski that Truex was really the guy who was looking like he was going to win the race. He worked over Logano, got past him. It took him several laps of trying very hard, racing very clean, and getting around him. And I have to say, I think Truex made a mistake. I think he made his move too early. He does the move he did with 2 laps to go, or whenever he made the pass with 1 lap to go, he wins the race, doesn't have to worry about getting run over by Logano. But when he made the move, he got way out in front, and as we have seen at Martinsville, and Joey Logano has been the victim of at Martinsville, it's very easy to just forget to brake and run into the back of another driver, and that's exactly what happened here. And of course, the natural reaction was vitriolic because, as we know, Logano is not the most liked driver in the world. He got booed at the racetrack. The track was very much in favor of Martin Truex Jr., and Truex had one of the greatest quotes of all time. He won the battle, but he won't win the damn war in regards to the championship. I love that. It's a shame that Parker Kligerman asked about 7 questions after that. He should have just left it at that. But regardless, I'm going to give you a little bit of stink on that because just leave it at that. It's the perfect promo. You can't go further, or you can't improve on that line. I'm sorry. But anyway, everybody was upset, as they usually are. I will say this. It's a good thing that we're talking about the race. We're upset about the race. And we're not upset about Brian France or upset about tapered spacers or any of that. None of that was here. This was a good old-fashioned NASCAR finish. This is, what makes NASCAR great. Now, again, people will say, well, you didn't like the Daytona finish. Yeah, I didn't like Austin Dillon wrecking Eric Almirola at 200 miles an hour. This is a little bit different when they're, 35 miles an hour in the corner at Martinsville versus 200 miles an hour. Do you see the difference here? And laying the bumper to somebody, we've seen that hundreds of times in the past in NASCAR racing. So not really a surprise there that it happened. And again, I really do put it down to a Truex mistake. Now, you got to know who you're racing. And you got to know Logano's history with his etiquette, with the way he drives at the end of these races. You should know that at this point. So I do lay a lot of that blame on Truex for going too early. Because what did you expect to happen? That being said, Logano's going to Homestead. And guess what? I don't believe he will win the championship. And it's not just because he's not a part of the Big Three. I still maintain that one of the Big Three is going to win the championship this year. But it's clear that if Truex makes it to the Final Four, Logano will not win the championship. Because I think either Truex will beat him so badly in the race that it won't really make much of a difference, or that Truex won't make the Final Four, get to Homestead, and I think it's going to be an intentional crash. One way or the other, that's what it's going to be. Barney Visser doesn't have to pay for the cars anymore after Homestead, so I'm sure they're not going to mind too much if Truex goes out there and sends Logano into the wall, making sure that he doesn't win the race. And again, this is a best-case scenario for NASCAR. We're talking about the race itself. We're talking about the future. I think some people would say that the chase contributed to this, the fact that it was a Game 7 moment for Joey Logano. I would say, yeah, kind of. I would probably say that we were maybe denied a finish because of the fact that Brad Keselowski was being nice to Joey Logano because of the chase. But we're also going to see all of this continue all the way until Homestead. We're going to be talking about this at Texas. Eddie Gossage already made his posters. We're going to be talking about it at Phoenix. And obviously we're going to be talking about it when they decide the championship in Homestead going forward. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, a lot to think about this. But I think the kind of conclusion a lot of people have been coming to ever since a lot of these races have been happening is the whole more short tracks thing. Well, you're not going to get more short tracks in 2019, but you might in 2020 when all the contracts start to... a lot of the contracts that they signed in 2004, and yes, I am still thinking about putting that video together where I kind of document where a lot of the things kind of fell apart around 2004, 2005 for NASCAR. A lot of those contracts that were signed then start to loosen up a little bit once 2020 comes around. So that's when we'll start to see a little bit of change. It seems like NASCAR is aware of what works and what doesn't. I think even Denny Hamlin said at the end in a press conference that, hey, we could put this show on every week if we were on tracks like this every week. And I don't deny that he's right in that, in terms of that. Now, how do I feel about Logano's move? I think he did what he had to do. I don't think he was necessary. It's weird because he was thinking big picture, thinking I got to win to get into Homestead. So that's big picture perspective. But I also think he wasn't thinking big picture because making enemies at this time of year, and even Kyle Busch, and what's interesting about Kyle Busch's statement at the end of the race, he sounded, if you haven't watched the interview, go watch it, but it certainly seemed like he's starting to act very teammate-like to Martin Truex Jr., and that would be obvious because I think it's the worst-kept secret now that Truex is going to be in that 19 car going into next year. So that's my thoughts on this weekend in racing. I don't know how often I will do this. I'm experimenting with some new stuff on the channel, but if you did enjoy this format, let me know down in the comments. And we'll be seeing you in the next video. I've got a very packed slate in terms of videos I want to upload this week, so I can't wait to see you for all of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe for more motorsport content. We'll see you in the next video. This has been David Land, and this has been This Weekend in Racing.